The Chosen Season 3 Episode 1 gave us so much, but one thing I wasn't expecting them to do was to reveal Judas's entire plan and motivation to betray Christ. We often see Judas as this villain who planned from the very beginning, or at least a long time, to betray Christ, someone that didn't truly believe in Christ at all. But what if I told you this might not have been the case, and there are a lot of other theories as to why Judas betrayed Christ? Episode 1, Season 3 of The Chosen shows us 3 scenes of Judas that give us a little bit more insight into who he is. One scene that The Chosen released a while ago that we've already broken down right here, and 2 more that I want to deep dive into today. The first scene is where we see Judas meet Jesus for the first time. He introduces himself and they begin to have a conversation, but there's a lot of things in here that are really interesting and give us a lot of information about who Judas is.
I'm Judas of Kerioth.
We see as Jesus is keen to actually have this conversation with Judas and wants to get to know him, as he saw him a little bit before the Sermon on the Mount. And Judas is extremely nervous to have this conversation overall. He keeps on mentioning things over and over again, like the fact that he went to Beit Midrash, which is like a secondary school for Jewish boys. He keeps bringing this up because it's important for someone that wants to follow a rabbi to have some schooling behind them to show that they're worthy enough for the rabbi. And he's trying to make this very clear because he's gone through Beit Midrash, but he didn't get to actually follow a rabbi because his father died. So he had to go back to the family trade and protect the family assets. But obviously this is not a requirement for Jesus. As he says, most of his followers have not attended Beit Midrash, so this is not something that he is really worried about. But he acknowledges that Judas is nervous during this conversation. What Jesus really cares about is the heart of Judas, who he is as a person, and is he willing to treat Jesus like any other rabbi and follow him, be like him. As we've heard it said many times in the past, when a student wants to follow a rabbi, it's like they have to follow in the dust of the rabbi, meaning they walk so closely to them that they try to emulate every little thing they do. This is what Jesus asks of his disciples. But even watching this conversation as many times as I have now, it's really interesting to think about it from Jesus's side. What would he think about this conversation? Because remember, he knew from the very beginning who would betray him. He knew what Judas was going to do, and yet he still gives him this opportunity to become one of his disciples. He still gives him this opportunity to walk through the journey and to choose to betray. I just wonder what other thoughts Jesus would have had in his mind during this conversation. Really hard to think about. At the end of this scene, Jesus says the famous words to Judas, "Follow me." And remember, this is a really, really big deal to someone who's trying to follow a rabbi. By saying yes to this, Judas actually says that he's going to commit to Jesus and that he's going to leave everything behind to follow him, which is exactly what we see in this next and most important scene with Judas. In this scene, we see Judas in his home as he begins to pack up all of his house, including a plant that we find out later actually belonged to his mom. He brings all of his stuff, including this plant, over to his sister Devorah's house. And while Devorah is not a biblical character, and we don't really know if Judas had any brothers or sisters or family at all, well, this really helps us give a great insight into who Judas actually is. There's a lot of really important things that we see in this conversation. The conversation begins with Devorah being worried about Judas, about this new journey that he wants to go on. She's worried about his safety, of course, but she's also worried about where his income is going to be coming from. Judas says, "My life can't just be about money." But then Devorah follows it up with a line that gives us great insight into who Judas is. She says, "It's never not about money with you." And this is a really interesting line, giving us some insight into the betrayal later on, yes, but also just to who Judas is overall. He's going to be stealing money from the coin purse of the group, and just his heart in general, even from season 2, has been focused around money as well.
Here's an advance. Let's take weeks off, rest, go for walks, do something new. Really? Why not? You're the one that said there's more to life than making money.
Thank you. I don't know what to say.
So we can see this habit that he has of the love of money over and over, even confirmed through his sister. Then they quickly speak about their father's inheritance that was left to Judas and how he spent it. Devorah thinks that she probably could have spent it a little bit better. But then Judas pulls out the deed to his house and gives it to her, as he doesn't know when or if he'll actually be back to take care of it. Again, Devorah's worry starts to rise. But then they start talking about the Sermon on the Mount and who this Jesus guy actually is. And Judas is amazed about how God used him to get the field that they used for it. In fact, specifically, he says that this has never happened to him before. maybe a little bit of an insight as to how close to God he actually is. Then he tells Devorah a little bit more about the plans that he has for Jesus's group, how he plans to organize them and help to make everything a little bit more efficient in the ministry. This is his skill set after all. Why else would Jesus call him? But now let's get to the heart of who Judas is and his understanding of who Jesus is overall. Judas tells his sister that this is the most important ministry of his people's history, and he wants to help spread his message so that they can make something that matches the Romans, and that they need his skills for that. These words show us exactly how Judas saw the Messiah overall, and it's not a surprise because this is exactly how many of the Jews, if not most of them, saw the Messiah to be. They wanted him to be a conquering king, to come and destroy the Romans, kill all of them, and set the Jewish people free. Right after these lines, Judas directly claims to believe that Jesus is the Messiah. And this really freaks out Devorah because she's seen what happens to people that claim to be the Messiah in the past. They are often killed, and all of their followers as well. But Judas reassures her. He says that if he is the Messiah, he will not be killed. He will destroy the Romans and set us free. When I heard this line in theaters, I was so ecstatic that this shows us exactly what Judas plans to do in the future. And if you don't understand, let me explain. It's not what we naturally think with Judas. It's not that he's a villain that just wants to kill Jesus and he's crazy and he doesn't think that Jesus is the Messiah. In fact, it's the complete opposite. He believes so much in Jesus, and he believes that he's come to destroy the Romans. So, in order to force him into it, he betrays him, thinking that Jesus would have no other choice but to attack the Romans, to make his army, and to defeat the people that Judas hates. Think about it from Judas's perspective. His entire life, he thought that the Romans would be destroyed by the Messiah. And when Jesus is doing things that don't quite make sense, he thinks that God's purpose for him is that he should put Jesus in this place, that he should betray him like this. Because after all, if he is the Messiah, he can't be killed. A betrayal like this would allow us to see Judas's humanity, to be able to see him as more than just a villain, someone who, yes, obviously went against what God wanted, but at the same time fulfilled exactly what happened and what needed to happen. And I truly believe that by the end of this series, we're going to have a better understanding of who Judas was, or at least who he could have been. Obviously, the biblical account doesn't lack anything. It shows us exactly what we need to know about Judas and where he went and what he did. But I think this is going to help us to see more of Judas's humanity and to help us to connect with him a little bit more, understanding that this could have been any of us. We've spoke of this type of theory for over a year now on the Snipe Life channel, but now this gives us real evidence to look at within the chosen universe. I really can't wait to see more of Judas in this and the upcoming seasons to see how this plays out over time. The conversation with Devorah continues through the rest of the scene, and there's a couple more things that really foreshadow the future for Judas. First, Devorah, as she mentions that if anything happens to Judas, the line of Iscariot will be forever broken. And of course, this is exactly what happens later on. And then also, Judas mentioning that Adonai has a plan for him, that he doesn't quite yet know what it is yet. And of course, we know exactly what that plan is. If you want to see more breakdowns of Season 3 of The Chosen, then go ahead and click on this one right here. And also, if you want to support this channel, the best way to do that is by going to our Patreon at patreon.com/thesnipelife. This would really help us out, as this is my full-time job now. Anyway, we'll see you on the next one. Peace.